Derek shifted his way from foot to foot, bouncing around like the floor was on fire. It got more panic the further away your sister and his brother got without you. Faye, you have to go. I'm the one who decided not to give him to our parents. It's not your fault, it's mine. You need to go have fun. I won't. When the other two were completely out of sight, Derek stopped his frantic movement, having spent all his excessive necessary nervous energy. You met his gaze head on, staring at the friend who simply couldn't help himself from being helpful. His face changed into something tense and small. You wondered how many times he did this, took on all the responsibility so that others didn't have to be bothered. It didn't seem like he was called out on it much. Slowly he smiled. His grin was tender enough to be genuine. Well then, if you're gonna be here anyways, we don't have to make ourselves miserable. It's you and me, Nicholas time. You nodded, ready to enjoy your time with Derek.
Alright.
Alrighty. He lifted Nicholas higher and stood tall, ready to take on the world. Then his knees buckled and he blushed. Can we sit down somewhere? Yeah, that's probably a good idea. After spending all that time searching high and low, both of you needed a break. You both dragged yourselves over to a nearby bench. It was thankfully empty and away from the crowd. Derek took a heavy seat and exhaled deeply. He kept Nicholas clutched close to his chest. It was a familiar motion, one that Derek must have done hundreds of times before. I get why Nicholas is so attached to you. I mean, you're probably there for him as much as his mom and dad. It'd be hard for Nicholas to not be as attached to you as he is.
Maybe?
Oh, maybe. He appeared surprised at your observation and unsure how to respond. He leaned his head back and whispered to the sky. I don't think that's such a bad thing. You weren't sure what to make of that. He wasn't lying, but looked too sad for it to be the full truth. He didn't say any more about it. After you both had settled, Derek carefully reached into his pocket. He struggled to dig around to find what he was searching for. Aha! He pulled out his special snack baggie in triumph. It was still completely full, untouched from this morning. Derek tried to pick out some morsels from the bag, but it was even harder to keep Nicholas from flopping over. Can I help? Derek blushed at your offer and became self-conscious over the fact that you noticed his difficulty. Thanks. Despite his embarrassment, he passed the snack to you. You took the bag and he steadied his hold on Nicholas. I just need the granola chunks. You can leave the other stuff in there. Is that your favorite? Yeah, but no. You squinted at him in confusion. He laughed cheekily, having expected your reaction. It's my favorite snack in the bag, but that's not the reason I want it. The other stuff isn't for me. There's a handful of cereal Nicholas secretly likes. That way, he can have something that's not just candies and cookies. I brought the walnuts for George in case we were out too long and he got hungry. And he dropped his gaze for you. He dropped his gaze from you shyly.
Honestly,
The gummy candies are for you, because maybe you'd get hungry too. That's 4 handfuls. That's so nice of you. Derek thought of others a lot. Giving up 3/4 of his snack bag showed just how much.
no worries.
It's nothing. His tone was bright at your encouragement. Do you want any gummy candies? You can take it. Sure, thank you. Derek beamed, more than happy to share. His planning had come in handy. You appreciated the snack. You carefully fished out some chunks of granola. They were slightly sticky to the touch. You dropped them into Derek's outstretched hand.
Thank
Thanks.
you.
He popped one of the tiny oat clusters into his mouth and started chewing. You wanted to eat and share your own snacks with Derek. You found your baggie and unzipped it. You started snacking along with Derek. Every so often, you plucked out some more granola from Derek's bags and pass it over between bites. Want some? You held out your baggie in a place where you could just pour it out for Derek if he said yes. His eyes lit up in amusement as he considered your snacks.
Definitely.
That'd be great. Sharing is caring. And thanks for getting mangoes for you. By the way, if I was gonna get a second thing for me, it would have been that. So this really worked out. You tipped some snacks out of your bag for Derek, and he gratefully munched on them. Both of you leisurely enjoyed the time. The bench was comfortable, the food was delicious, and the scenery was busy enough there was always something to watch. The munching and high-pitched snoring served as the only sounds between you for a while. You passed Derek the last cluster of granola. You'd had to really try to get it out of the bag around all the cereal and walnut chunks. He accepted it with great enthusiasm and then took his final bites. He swallowed, satisfied. Hmm. He absent-mindedly patted Nicholas's head as he peered up and down the street. Something caught his eyes and he lit up. I was so focused before, I kinda forgot where we were. This is still the boardwalk. He was as excited as he had been towards the beginning of the day.
Let's go.
Wanna walk around? There's a lot of there's a lot of interesting stuff here, even if we're only looking. Okay. Derek gave you a thumbs up and then hummed at Nicholas. Can you help me move him to my back? That'll be easier for a long haul. You stood up to help. It took both of you fumbling around, but with effort you were able to get the little boy comfortably on Derek's back. Then you left the bench behind to explore the bustling waterfront park. Without consciously deciding to, you gravitated to the edge of the path closest to the sea. You studied the beautiful ocean, your breath almost taken away by how the water sparkled under the last flickers of sunlight. The evening remained pleasantly warm despite the encroaching darkness. Your skin felt taut under your face paint. The paint had started to crack after its long exposure to the elements. Is it normal for Nicholas to fall asleep like this? Kind of. Sometimes something is so exciting that Nicholas bounces off the walls just imagining it. By the time he actually gets there, he's already burnt himself out. I'm pretty sure Nico didn't sleep at all last night because he knew today was gonna be boardwalk day. I used to do that when I was little. Derek grinned and pressed his cheek into Nichols. I hope Nicholas is at least having a good dreams.
Yeah.
I bet he is. Walking down the boardwalk was peaceful. The conversation was easy with the occasional giggle. Other groups of people passed by, couples, young friend groups, and families with children was bustling about. You caught silvers of conversation, ranging from the mundane to philosophical. Derek glanced at the faces around him and grinned to himself. It kind of feels like we're parents and this is our kid. He twisted around to show you Nicholas with amusement. Oh yeah, our next trip should be to a wedding chapel. I bet that would be fun. Nicholas could be the ring bearer. Would he stay awake for it? Maybe, maybe not. You both laughed at the absurdity. As he led you down the boardwalk, you noticed a new skip in his step. Hey, I have an idea. Let's ride the Ferris wheel. We've officially given up on getting our parents, and even Nico can do that. That'd be perfect. Derek let out a whoop and turned around like it was a little happy dance. You laughed, charmed by his enthusiasm. You both eagerly made your way through the crowd to get in line for the one ride that was an option for you. Derek cautiously weaved past people, making sure no one accidentally bumped into Nicholas on the way. The line was short, and it didn't take long for you to start boarding the ride. You piled into the cabin with Derek, and Derek placed Nicholas in the corner of the metal bench. He sat next to him. Nicholas snuffled when he was jostled, but didn't wake. Derek wrapped his arm around him to secure him from falling forward. Nicholas unconsciously leaned his head over to resort on him. You rested on the bench across from them, eye to eye with Derek. It felt sturdy under you. Derek's grin widened, and he tapped his toes together as he waited for the ride to start. And it did. The carriage car rocked forward. Slowly you ascended into the sky. You could see the entire expanse of the boardwalk from the cabin. It was an amazing sight. From this height, the stalls and decorations looked like a magical land of toys. You glanced at Derek, curious if he was enjoying the view too. The sun had continued to sink as the Ferris wheel rose, and the light that reached into the cabin through the little window was low. Sharp-edged shadows cut across Derek's body. He'd stopped shuffling his feet and switched to tapping a finger against the top of his knee in a jittery, uneven beat. With Nicholas still sound asleep, it felt like you were alone with Derek. He smiled at you in good humor across the way, but there was an undercurrent of that nervousness and the shake of his hands that had betrayed it. In the small space high in the air, with no one else anywhere around, Derek took the chance to open up to you. So, Faye, wanna hear something kinda embarrassing about me? You nodded hesitantly. That description made you feel a little guilty for wondering, but he wanted to tell you, so okay. Derek clasped and unclasped his hands like he was working over bread dough. The bashful whisper of his tone made his secret hard to catch. Well, this sort of thing is kind of like a dream or something that I've got. You waited for him to explain. Derek shifted shyly. His head went low, but his eyes glanced up at you. When Derek spoke again, it was in a tiny voice. I'm talking about having somebody who's there when stuff like this happens. Your eyebrows shot up, but the rest of your body froze in place. Derek timidly sunk down in his seat. He brushed his little brother's bangs away from his closed eyes. It was a nervous momentary distraction. Nicholas offered him some emotional support just by being there. I like thinking about people I love. I really, seriously do like doing stuff that makes them happy. I don't want to have to stop doing any of that, even though it's annoying sometimes. Annoying for me and whoever tries to stick with me. He showed an apologetic grin for a moment before his intense earnestness returned. Derek tightened his hand into fists.
I don't know.
But I don't want to have to make that better by doing more for myself and less for them. What I really want is someone who's there for me. Then it be even. My family cares about me, obviously, but a lot of time that's the thing I need help with. With a laugh, Derek liberally tousled the hair of his beloved Pain in his side, who lay there, the youngest brother remaining blissfully unaware of the trouble he caused. The humor in his tone left Derek as quickly as it had appeared. He couldn't get away from how serious the topic was, or how much it truly meant to him. It'd be cool to have somebody who was on my side and who liked me because of me, not because they're my family and are supposed to love me. For a single instant his eyes met yours, but then he instantly focused on the world outside and scuffed clouded windows of the old Ferris wheel. You could see a lopsided grin reflected in the glass. Don't tell my bros I imagine some pretty dumb things. I promise, this'll stay just between us.
Thanks.
Thanks. The foggy face you could make out in the window pane softened. You wasn't ready to show it directly, but you were glad you still got a glimpse of it. He grasped the top of his knee and took in a deep breath through his nose. When he exhaled, he carefully laid out a few more words for consideration. Hey, Faye, is there somebody that you think? But he never placed the last part.
Forget it.
Never mind, forget it. It's alright, you can tell me later. Thanks, you're great. It was just this idea I've been kicking around, but I should probably think about it a lot more. Besides, Derek shrugged an arm and cocked his head down to the extra bit of company he was still gently snoring. It's kind of awkward to talk about all this personal stuff with my baby brother right here, even if he's asleep. He chuckled good-naturedly, moving his hand to scratch behind his ear. Maybe I can try again later. The back of his foot knocked against the lower wall of the outcropping metal seat on repeat. It sounded the end of the conversation, but that didn't mean nothing else was on his mind. Derek was always considering something, and most of the time it was other people, things someone else might have missed or forgotten, weren't taken for granted by him. Thanks for helping me with the snacks before. That piece of appreciation was given easily. The next, though, was far meager. And thanks for coming with me. Thanks for letting me come with you. This time Derek shared his bright and bashful face directly with you. You could always count on him. That was a certainty, and Derek knew that sentiment was mutual. You would look out for him whether he did it for himself or not, whether he asked you to do or not, and whether he wanted you to do or not. That was just as sure. Not much more was said before the ride came to its steady, inevitable end. You disembarked from the cabin with Nicholas securely in Derek's arms. He strolled from the exit to the nearest stall to ask the employee what time it was. 8 p.m. was quickly approaching. We better go to the meetup place. Can you help me get Nickel on my back again? How about I carry him now? Oh. Instinctively, Derek pulled back. He clung tighter to his youngest brother, keeping the weight of the burden squarely on himself. You waited, calm and stable. Ultimately, the tension in his face and the hesitancy in his heart faded, and he accepted your offer graciously. That'd actually be great. Thanks, Faye. Derek shifted his grip on Nicholas before he propped the small boy over your shoulders. He You tucked your elbows around Nicholas' knees and hunched over so he wouldn't slip off. Nicholas draped heavily on your back like a fluffy carved-patterned cape. He really wasn't that heavy, but you could easily imagine how carrying that extra load could get tiresome after a while. Derek definitely needed a break. Perfect. Together, you wandered across the path. The people surrounding you were full of enthusiasm, bristling from ride to ride and store to store, but a quiet peace had settled between you and Derek. Your day at the boardwalk was already coming to an end. The sky had gone completely dark by the time you reached the meeting spot, but the world around you was still awash with light. Street lamps bore down on you while spotlights shot upwards to illuminate the biggest rides. You and Derek huddled at the side of the path. You wanted to stay out of the way of other visitors who were trickling off to the parking lot and the ones who were rushing to the opposite way for a last-minute excursion on the boardwalk. You hoped the strangers enjoyed themselves, but for you and Derek plus the sleeping Nicholas, there was nowhere to go. At least not until you caught sight of your currently missing family members.
I figured.
We beat them. Yeah. You used the break as an opportunity to readjust Nicholas. He'd started to slide a bit during the trip over. Since there were only 2 awake members of your group, you both wordlessly kept your eyes peeled. Every figure approaching in the distance was scrutinized and then disregarded as just another stranger. That process repeated for a few minutes, but eventually 2 shadowed forms coming down the path stepped under a light, and you immediately recognized them. George, Elizabeth. Derek jumped and waved his hands over his head. He was entirely free to draw attention to himself that way thanks to you taking over piggybacking Nicholas. Even on the other end of the boardwalk, you could tell Elizabeth was smirking. When Derek's brother and your sister rejoined you in front of the first stall, you were proven right. She definitely had a leering smirk. It's very cute that you're taking a turn with this precious baby. Huh? Derek barked out a laugh. Elizabeth's smile wasn't the only notable thing on her face, and even Derek wasn't polite enough to let her get away with it. Maybe, but what's on your forehead? The oldest kid hadn't returned exactly the same way you left her. She now had a bright white golf ball emblazoned on her skin with non-toxic water-soluble paint. You went back to the face painting stall? After just a small huff, Elizabeth plainly laid out her case. George and I talked a little about sports we liked. When I told him I did golf, he suggested I get face paint of that. I did, and it was fun. Her chin was high, and she spoke with defiance. Elizabeth absolutely refused to be embarrassed by her change of mind. George stood at your sister's side and proudly took credit for the accomplishment. She didn't want to do it before because she was just being an Elizabeth. Huh? Better than being a Borge? George and Elizabeth chuckled at the quips. Apparently, they had unique nicknames for one another now. It left Derek nearly speechless.
Wow.
Wow. Clearly, you and Derek weren't the only ones who went through a bonding experience this evening. I'm glad you had fun. What else did you think would happen? You had a lot of unfortunate scenarios you could have imagined, but someone beat you to punch when it came to saying it out loud. That you'd act too cool for everything and George would sit around sad all day?
Rude.
Well, that's rude and it didn't happen. And that's why we're glad. Light-hearted laughter drifted around the group. Whether you were divided up or all together, the Suarez and Madison kids enjoyed each other's company. Your sister then exhaled calmly and followed it with a sage nod. I'll take Nicholas now. Oh. Whether Derek was going to agree or disagree with the offer, you didn't know, but Elizabeth didn't give him the chance. She wasn't suggesting what he thought she was. We've got like 10 or 15 minutes left. The two of you should use it. What? You want us to leave him with you? Uh-huh. Derek took a hesitant step back and turned his face away. His expression tensed the same way it had when he first realized Nico was going asleep for the rest of the trip. Nicholas is gonna be mad if I'm not there. The resistance was a meek mumble, and his middle brother spoke with much more boldness. Nicholas isn't gonna know, and what he doesn't know won't kill him. George. Derek was at a loss on where that had come from. You hadn't expected it either. George was never the rule bender. You must have missed even more than you thought during his time with Elizabeth. Derek, let's go for it. See, even your darling Faye wants you to stop being such a goody two-shoes for a single second. Go have fun for Pete's sake. Yeah, hurry. You have to do stuff at the boardwalk while we're at the boardwalk. He shyly scuffed his sneakers on the ground with a dull-eyed expression that was more expected from Nicholas. It was exceedingly rare for anyone to tell Derek what the plan was. He was used to coming up with all the ideas and taking charge. Derek glanced at you. It was impossible not to smile at him. Alright, I'll do it. Okay. Finally, there was a quick passing of the buck. As Elizabeth took Nicholas into her hands, she carefully positioned his head against her shoulder and cradled his legs under her forearms. Derek found the hold satisfactory and entrusted his youngest brother to her the same way he'd let her borrow the responsibility of watching out for George. No more time was wasted. You shot off down the boardwalk one more time. The flow of traffic had shifted even more from when you'd started waiting, with everyone except for you moving towards the exit. You pushed against the tide into the heart of the park. Your feet and heart were beating hard. Derek shouted over the sound in a breathless, thrilled voice. The lines are all gone. The lines are all gonna be short the slate, but I don't think we can do two. Which one do you wanna do? Or we don't have to go on a ride at all. I wanna do what you wanna do. Oh, could we do the roller coaster? Definitely. Alright. The joy in his chair betrayed how disappointed he must have really been to miss out on the roller coaster before. He had put on a brave face before and in the end had the chance to get his due reward. You would make certain that he got on that ride. You and Derek sped straight to your goal. You couldn't help but tilt your head back every so often as the roller coaster loomed closer. As Derek had theorized, the line wasn't even half the length it was for most of the day. It only took a few minutes before you were on the platform and awaiting your ride, and even better, you got the very front seats on the coaster. You jumped into the cart along with Derek and pulled the safety bar down in front of you. He was bristling with anticipation, so the restraints were especially useful. A clicking sound like the winding of a clock chimed out, and the ride began its gradual climb upward. It reached the summit, and after an appropriately stomach-tightening pause, it rolled over the edge. Cool summer air rushed over your face and whipped your hair as you descended at the weakened speed. Derek threw his arms into the air as he squealed in delight. You were jostled in your seat, vibrating with the motion of the coaster. Derek and you took turns knocking into other around every bend. You both laughed every time. When you came to a tearing stop back at the station, you lifted off the restraint together and made your exit down the other side of the ride. Derek ruffled his hands through his hair to straighten out his characteristic spikes. He was absolutely beaming on the way out. Derek stared at the sparkling stars beyond the glitz and clamor of the boardwalk. There was a peace between you that hadn't been there at any other moment during your trip. Hey.
Ew.
His eyes had stolen the shine from the cosmos when he placed his gaze back on you. It was way too awkward to talk about this before with my little brother right there, but I just want to say I really like hanging out with you, Faye. I love my brothers and parents a ton, and my other friends are great too, but when I have to pick someone to team up with, I think about you. He shrugged his shoulders with a shy grin. Derek was someone you could count on for honesty, but sometimes it still surprised you what he was capable of. I think of you too. Oh, cool. Getting the chance to spend some time with truly just the two of you was more than you could have hoped for. You owed Elizabeth one. Despite taking an entire extra jaunt around the boardwalk, you still arrived at the entrance before your parents. However, There had been a shift in the group. Nicholas was awake. As soon as Derek noticed the small third figure standing by Nicholas and George, he started like he was hit by a bolt. He made a break for his siblings, and you were right behind him. The motion was not exactly subtle, and it caught the attention of the boy in question. He let out a shout when he saw your rapid approach. Well, technically it wasn't your arrival that had an impact. Derek's back. Nicholas sprinted away from the meeting spot, not willing to wait a single second for the reunion. He crashed into Derek, wrapping his arms around his brother's thighs and sticking his head in the space between Derek's legs. It was powerful enough to knock Derek off balance. He had to swing his arms out to the side to stop his wobbling. Once he was sure he wasn't going to topple over, Derek bent down and scooped up his hanger-on. Seeing Derek carrying Nicholas felt extremely familiar by this point, considering that had been the case for the entire afternoon. But Derek wasn't sick of it yet. He could handle it for a little longer. Derek nudged his head towards the other two members of your party, encouraging you to come. Together, you and Derek walked the rest of the way to the boardwalk entrance, while Nicholas clung on to Derek the whole way. George waved you over. Welcome back. Hey. And the moment you were in whispering distance, you were greeted by a hushed message from your own big sibling. Good job. She put a finger to her cheek and smirked. Derek slowly kneeled to let Nicholas get down. The little boy stood on his own 2 feet, but his 2 hands didn't detach. They only grasped the hem of Derek's jersey instead. While brushing his brother's messy hair, Derek glanced up at Nicholas' temporary babysitters. He stared at them questioningly. What happened? Was the obvious unspoken question. He's only been up for a few minutes. Yeah. And he was really grumpy at first 'cause you weren't there. But we got him talking about the dream adventure he had when he was sleeping to get him busy, and that worked. It was really funny, and Nicole had a good time too. George beamed with pride at success, and you noticed how much closer he stood to Elizabeth. Your sister accepted his company just as welcomingly. They were their own partners in crime for the day. I'm basically positive that after about 5 seconds, he stopped telling us his actual dreams and was making it all up, but it was cute. Derek blinked at the two as if he had witnessed a miracle, and it kind of was. In a small way, he was able to pass the mental of responsibility, and everything turned out fine. However, Elizabeth and George wouldn't be replacing Derek anytime soon, or likely ever. Nicholas may have behaved for a bit, but now that his biggest brother was here, the young lad wanted to be taken care of. His gaze dropped to the ground as at the end of Derek's shirt. Derek, my tummy hurts. I want an ice cream. No ice cream, Nico. That's not gonna help your stomach. But you have some of my snacks. I saved you part of it. Derek's tone really sold the idea. It was full of appeal from the fact it was his snacks. He could hype up a product better than any of the employees running games on the boardwalk. Nicholas brightened immediately. He clasped his own collar and leaned his head all the way back to look up at his brother's face from where he stood against Derek's leg. He wasn't kept waiting long. Derek pulled the baggie out of his pocket and sifted through the mix of walnuts and cereal to pick out the treat especially chosen for Nico. Once he collected the small handful, he passed it over to Nicholas, carefully dropping the round cereal puffs one by one in Nicholas's tiny palm. The amount was almost overflowing. Nicholas gratefully received the offerings. He shoved the whole thing into his face and ate directly out of his hand. It reminded you of feeding oats to a pony, except in this case Nicholas was both the feeder and the fed. Derek nodded in satisfaction and rolled the bag over in his palm. George, these are for you. He gathered the last wayward pieces of cereal and then offered the well-worn bag of nothing but walnuts to the middle child. It's been a really long day, and there's still the ride back. You should eat something. George didn't argue with that. He gladly accepted his brother's thoughtful gesture.
Thank you.
Thanks. George plucked out just one from the pack, the hardiest looking walnut in the bunch, and took a bite out of it. His gaze shifted towards Elizabeth, or Elizabeth as George knew her, as he swallowed his snack. Then he asked the question, "Do you want any?"
Thanks.
You know what? I would. Thanks. Elizabeth was the third person who took a turn of opening up a hand to receive a snack. George shook a few of the nuts into her awaiting palm. Derek, you and Faye can have some too. Nicholas's fingers remained pushed against his mouth, but his distinct chomping stopped. He spoke muffled words filtered through a handful of half-crushed cereal.
Okay.
I can share too. He stuck his sticky palm up towards Derek's face instead of his own. The gesture had crumbs cascading down his shirt. Nico couldn't reach high enough to get it all the way to his brother's mouth. Derek shook with giggles and poked Nicholas's wrist to nudge the pile of soggy cereal away. He had to take a second to breathe before he could explain himself. I've got some of the cereal right here. That'll be from you. Thanks, sir. Thanks, Nicholas. I'm gonna eat it. The logic seemed sound to Nicholas, or maybe just seeing his brother smile made Nicholas smile too. Either way, he accepted that not taking more of the cereal counted as him sharing it. But he wasn't done. Nicholas turned around on a dime, arm still outstretched, and positioned his hand towards you. Amazingly, he wanted to share with someone other than Derek. You kiddos are way more too nice. You matched Derek and laughed. You knew he was trying to be nice, but it was just hilarious. Before Nicholas could start filling bites to, before Nicholas started filling bits of cereal at you in his eagerness to share, a warm voice boomed above the din of the busy boardwalk. Good evening, family and friends. It was Mr. Suarez, and not only him. You spotted all four of the parents weaving their way through the crowd. We're here. The sight of his mommy and daddy made Nicholas forget all about feeding you his pre-chewed snack. He smashed the remaining cereal into his mouth so he could use both hands to wave at his parents. Mom, Dad. Derek called back with equal excitement. The parents picked up the pace and came to gather around their children. Greetings were shared between adults and kids. Immediately, Ma noted the face paint that was now adorning your group.
Wonderful.
You all look wonderful, so creative. Nicholas forced himself to swallow the mouthful. This was the moment he'd been waiting for. He snuck in a huge breath, pointed to his cheek, and screeched. Ah, that's a spider. There's a spider. Oh no, you're right. It is a spider. My goodness, it's terrifying.
Be careful.
Don't make any quick movement, kiddo. It might bite you.
Yes.
Yes, wait here. I will help you soon. Mr. Suarez gave Nico's chubby cheek a pinch to get rid of the dangerous arachnid. He retreated his hand in shock when he realized it was in fact only paint. Nicholas snickered gleefully at the hubbub among the grown-ups. Mission accomplished. Mrs. Suarez then clasped her hands together to change the topic. Well, everyone, I'm sorry you beat us here. Hopefully you weren't waiting too long.
This is gonna be great.
Yeah, it was fine.
I
I appreciate you waiting here for us. We went on a very lovely bike ride across the boardwalk.
Really?
Really? You were out there pedaling around on bikes? Elizabeth and George's face of genuine surprise at the news helped to distract from the awkward, knowing glances you shared with Derek. Returning them was a real hassle. That's why we got here late. Definitely worth it, though. It was. And did you children have a good day? Nicholas threw his hands in the air to answer with full force. Yeah. Derek softly patted his littlest brother's head. His voice was much quieter and distinctly relieved. Yeah. You, George, and Elizabeth nodded and offered your own points of agreement. It might not have gone as you had imagined, but none of you would consider it a waste of time. It was an experience worth having.
That's great.
That's great. I'm sure you made the most of what you had, but we better get going. It is very late. Perhaps we should pick dinner up on the way home. Absolutely. It's been hours since we left, and Nicholas can always sleep in the car since we since we won't be home before bedtime either way. All the kids, except for Nicholas, had their face go completely flat, and Elizabeth snorted. Mrs. Suarez didn't miss that instant reaction. She raised a brow. Derek straightened the bands of his wrist and broke the news to his mom. There was a glint of amusement in his eyes. Sorry, Mom. I don't think that's gonna happen. Nicholas remained oblivious to the discussion going on about him. He was sleeping and bounding from board to board, completely refreshed. His mother frowned. It was obvious to her what had occurred. Mr. Suarez was unflustered. He shared some dignified optimism. Well then, he'll be up to keep us company.
True.
True, we'll all be together. Those words reached the small ears of the youngest person there. Nicholas held onto Derek's abdomen, liking the sound of the promise. His older brother looked down at him warmly.
Good job, team.
Glad to have you back, Nicole. And George, you're such a reliable bro. He wrapped one arm around Nicholas and reached over to pull his other brother into the hug. George welcomed and reciprocated the embrace. The Suarez trio snuggled together in a tight squeeze, and their flaking face paint rubbed off on each other. Your gaze wandered from the public display of affection and went to your older sister. Elizabeth was definitely not a hugger, but you whispered your own sibling, Lee, appreciation for her. Thanks, Elizabeth, for watching Nicholas. She gave a smug flip of her hair. Forget it. I owe you one after your grand stunt for me on Daddy Day. Aw, Elizabeth,
Let's go.
let's go. That was all that needed to be said. Your completed party took their final steps on the boardwalk, heading straight towards the parking lot. Mrs. Suarez was leading the pack. Mom, hey Mom! Nicholas shouted and waved to get his mother's attention from behind while still using one hand to grip Derek. Guess what? Elizabeth carried me. She did? That's so considerate. Elizabeth.
Oh.
Elizabeth. your, your moms were walking arm in arm, sharing hushed commentary with each other a distance from the group and tittering over what they heard. You're so sweet, Elizabeth. I am. I feel that who carried Nicholas the most today should get the biggest say in what we have for dinner.
My thoughts exactly.
I'd second that. Sounds fair to me. Then we all agree. I guess this means Derek will be our dinner decider for the night.
Maybe.
Probably. Derek scratched at the spider on his cheek and chuckled airily. She shrugged without comment and simply continued to walk. His little brother stayed at Derek's sides, and they bumped along together. You strolled with Elizabeth while the parents surrounded the sets of siblings at the front and from the behind. Derek's hands were full with Nicholas and George, but he snuck a fond glance over at you. None of his excitement had faded. The night was still young and bright, and you knew you could count on every person there. Despite being miles away from Sunset Bird, you felt right at home.